The only way to really understand like Bitcoin is why was it created in the first place, right? And then you have to realize that Bitcoin is a solution to many problems, trusting third parties, governments, debasing currencies, all these different things. And
Yeah.
then you have these aha moments of, oh, there's only 21 million. Oh, the difficulty adjustment. Oh, you can't double spend. Like that, I didn't even think about that as like a concept, but yeah, it makes sense. That's why we've needed trusted third parties to tell us, oh, this digital money moved. Now we don't need that anymore.
All right, Neil Jacobs, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thanks for having me, Bram. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm happy you're here. I saw that you've also been into Bitcoin since 2013, same as me. And at the time of this recording, we're kind of hovering around 70,000. We just went a little bit below or back above. I don't really know, but we're around that price point. So in 2013, did you ever think we would get here?
Well, it's funny. In 2013, when I first found out about Bitcoin, I was talking to a friend, and he brought up Bitcoin. He's like, "Yeah, I bought Bitcoin to buy drugs on the internet." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." So I didn't want to buy Bitcoin and buy drugs, but I opened up a Coinbase account. They just started in 2013, I think. It was like September of 2013, and I bought a few Bitcoin for $120 per Bitcoin back then.
Nice.
And it like tripled. It was right at the like height of the bull cycle back then, the bull market. I think it ran up to like 1100. But I probably sold it when it tripled because I didn't understand what I held back then. And I'm like, I'm out, done with this. And then saw it crash back down. Didn't really pay attention to it. Then a few years later, got back in. And I started reading a little bit more about, the purpose of Bitcoin. And I saw the world really moving into a turbulent place. So I said, oh, I'll buy some Bitcoin because it seems like that's one reason you should have it. But I still really didn't get it at that point. I started trading with all the other cryptocurrencies. There were a lot of good narratives and stories out there. And if you didn't really understand what you owned, you weren't gonna, have the conviction to really only buy Bitcoin and have a lot of thoughts about it long term. But since then, to where it's come in all those years, it's truly remarkable. I remember in 2013 reading a few articles about like price predictions and people saying Bitcoin's going to go to $5,000 or Bitcoin's going to go to, $10,000. I'm like, that's insane. Right. And now that's nothing. That's a rounding error. And we move a few $1,000s in a day now, easy. So it's crazy. And it's crazy now, on the news, I'm talking about Bitcoin. I saw the other day, there was like, maybe it was earlier today or yesterday in the state where I live, Florida, they're considering putting Bitcoin in like their pension funds.
Yeah.
So it's wild.
Yeah. I think I could have never predicted that. The last thing that you said, we're seeing this now. And I think you're probably similar where you think like, yeah, of course, this makes sense. You should do that, but it takes so much time to get to that point, right? It's funny you mentioned that you bought around like $120. I think I bought around like 300, 400, and I sold everything at 4,000 somewhere. And when I look up like my old tweets, I remember I have a tweet from 2014 that says, wow, Bitcoin crashed back to $100, like volatile much, it's really funny to read. And I have like another one that says, Bitcoin is a synthesized digital commodity. And when I read that, I'm like, damn, like I got it, but I didn't get it, it takes some time to really, really get there. Can you remember like what got you into it? Was it just your friend buying drugs, or after you sold it and getting back in, like how did your perspective change? Like what made you study it at some point?
So yeah, 2016, 2017 was like the first, 2015 through 2017, I was started with all the trading and the other cryptocurrencies. I kind of knew the whole time that the goal was to get as much Bitcoin as you can, but I still didn't really understand it. Then after 2017, when the crypto bubble burst back then, I was like, I'm done with this stuff. I still held it, including like other cryptocurrencies, but I didn't really pay much attention until 2019 again. And I started listening to podcasts and reading books. And back when I first got in 2013, there weren't really podcasts like there are now, or books. Maybe there were, and I just was unaware. Now there's just so much information out there. There's no excuse to not learn about Bitcoin now, and there's just such a repository of information. But I started listening heavily in 2019 to a bunch of podcasts. One I like recall of really orange pilling me, which is kind of ironic, is Bitcoin Tina was on CK. He worked for Bitcoin Magazine at the time. They did like a 4-part series with Bitcoin Tina, who's now I don't know, kind of persona non grata in the Bitcoin community with a lot of people. Him and I are still good friends, but I was listening to his podcast, and it was like about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And every time I would listen to it, I'm like, I don't have enough Bitcoin. I need more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then in early 2020, I read Jeff Booth's book, and that completely changed my perception of everything. I kind of knew a lot of what he was talking about intuitively, but the way he laid it out really kind of like blew my mind. So I like credit Bitcoin Tina and Jeff Booth with being two of the really big, impactful people on my orange pilling journey, even though I bought Bitcoin back in 2013. And I watched some videos over the years. It just really didn't sink in. And my prior career, I was a CPA. So for those like not in the US, certified public accountant. So I was in the accounting world. And when I read Jeff Booth's book, I kind of came to the conclusion that my job is going to be completely taken over by technology, AI. I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years. So it was just an impetus for me to buy even more Bitcoin, because I'm like, I need an insurance policy against, not having a job. Fortunately for me, I've kind of built my skill set. I don't even do accounting anymore. And now I do more marketing, and I own my own business. But yeah, it was like technology's taking over. And I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years, but I need to like accumulate as much Bitcoin as I can, because I think this is like my only way out, or my way of protecting myself against being obsolete in an old industry. So yeah, I would say like 2020, right? It might have been, it started before the pandemic, like all the shutting down of things. But that also like accelerated my growth in the space. And then what really legitimized it for me, and some people are gonna be like, oh, you needed to hear this from someone else, but it was May of 2020. I heard Paul Tudor Jones come out positively about Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, this is with like the big boys now on Wall Street. Like, yeah, I am going. So I already had this conviction, and I'm just like, I'm going all in here.
Yeah. Well, I think I have had similar experiences with, Wall Street legends, or people that, I mentioned Greg Foss a lot, for example. He says, like his Twitter bio says, I spent 35 years in a risk chair. And I read that when I was 35, and I thought, well, what the hell do I know,
right.
After hearing him talk. But I think that's also what Bitcoin slowly brings you, in a sense that you are really open to looking at other people and trying to dissect what they say. Why do they say it? Why are they paying attention? Why is someone like Paul Tudor Jones, who's a Wall Street legend, why is he paying attention to this random magic internet coin thing? Like, is that, it's probably a signal, right? But you need your own information about Bitcoin to kind of like, put that next to each other and see what eventually you kind of like make out of that. But I've had the same, like where for me it's Bill Miller, for example, Bill Miller IV. You know him? He has this big, I think it's a hedge fund with his father, Bill Miller III. when I hear him talk, I'm like, damn, okay, it's this guy's job to understand what's going on in the world of money and finance. And when I hear him talk about Bitcoin, I'm like, okay, I this solidifies also my conviction. But I think what's very important to emphasize is that it's not about like believing what this other person tells you, right? It's kind of like, oh, interesting. And I mean, this is the same when you listen to podcasts, or you mentioned the people that made it click for you at some point. It's all about how someone says it that kind of like resonates with how you think about it. And then you can kind of put that together and realize, okay, I think I actually understand what this is, what the impact is, where it goes in the future. And I think that eventually solidifies your conviction, not the fact that someone famous said, you should buy Bitcoin or get into Bitcoin. It's like these moments that help you along the way.
They definitely help. And look, ultimately, you need to have your own conviction. Because when Bitcoin's crashing, Paul Tudor Jones and Bill Miller aren't going to be there to hold your hand through it, right? Or when it's dipping, or when there's some like news and the price tanks
on their yacht, right?
Right. They're not going to be there with you.
Yeah.
Are you looking to save in Bitcoin for your retirement? Meet OnRamp, the leader in Bitcoin financial services. OnRamp has just launched the industry's first Bitcoin IRA with multi-institution custody. That means unparalleled support, transparency, and peace of mind for your retirement. With OnRamp, you can verify your assets directly on-chain and protect them with the support of 3 independent institutions, eliminating the risks of a single point of failure. Are you ready to take control of your Bitcoin retirement? Visit the link below or go to onrampbitcoin.com to learn more about OnRamp's Bitcoin IRA.
But, it wasn't even that I didn't have conviction myself. It was that I had conviction, and that made me more desperate to accumulate faster. I'm like, oh, this thing's going to like pick up a lot faster than I even thought.
Yeah.
You need to, there's been all these signals along the way, right? What the big name, Michael Saylor with MicroStrategy and what they're doing. And then I remember it might've been 2021 to hear, oh, Mass Mutual is the insurance company is buying $100 million worth of Bitcoin. Then Tesla is buying Bitcoin. It's like all these little things should be signals to you. It's kind of crazy to me these days that people see these things and still ignore Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's hard to put myself in their position because there was a time where I didn't understand Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there was less things happening in the world around Bitcoin. So I don't know if it's just that I realize them more because I'm in the Bitcoin world, and I'm being too hard on people when I say like they should get it. But there's just so much more these days. It's wild to me that there's still like haters. But that's our opportunity.
I mean, that's fine. I think eventually I think it's kind of like information arbitrage in a sense.
Yeah.
I think what you I'm surprised as well. I tweeted today, like, me talking about Bitcoin, and then this GIF that's like a guy who says like, come on, like it's so obvious.
Yeah.
But took me 10 years to get to the point where I'm like, man, no, anyone who's not studying Bitcoin is an idiot. And I'm saying it in the friendliest way possible, right? Like, I mean, it's so undeniable that I think that is what I don't want to say triggers me, but it's like, come on, like I would love for more people to find this out, because the finance bros have figured it out, and I'd rather have like general people owning Bitcoin than the finance bros that start here with the greed that they have, and we can make money and all these things. But yeah, unfortunately, I think they have figured it out. So I see it as kind of it's a race, but people decide for themselves if they want to join the race. Like, we cannot force anyone, right? Like, you cannot orange pill the other people. So I think eventually it's kind of like an exercise of patience, with yourself and with other people, and just keep sharing the message and talking about this, sharing our personal journeys, and then hopefully that inspires people to study it eventually.
Yeah, we're in such a different position now. When I was really falling down the rabbit hole, I wanted to tell everyone about Bitcoin, and so many people like, I don't want to hear it, or
Yeah.
But now, like, so many people come to me, because they know, oh, Neil, he's the Bitcoin guy, in my group of friends or circles, let's talk to him, that I don't even try to convince people anymore. And I'm sure you get that a lot now, that people, around you and in your circles, like, oh, he's the Bitcoin guy. You have so many people that will want to seek information from you now that you don't have to like convert people who don't want to be converted. So it's a lot easier these days.
Well, it's also so interesting when, I do get those inquiries, but people want a shortcut, and I know how annoying it sounds when I say like, okay, guys, there is no shortcut. Like seriously, there's no shortcut, because we are so incredibly programmed and biased towards believing that, the money that we have right now is the best solution to ever exist to solve, the function that money should have, like it's, and people are annoyed when I say like, there's no shortcut. Sorry, you want a shortcut, but I cannot tell you. And then it's like, I'm keeping a secret that I don't want to tell them. Right. And then I'm like, it's not like that. It's just very complicated. Like I cannot give you the summary of 10 years in 10 minutes. It's, well, it's actually one of the reasons I also started this podcast, where I think like, okay, I'm just sharing all my stuff, and if you want to listen, then listen, and hopefully, well, again, like you can create some touch points that people get on. But I wanted to ask you something about that, because the book you mentioned, Jeff Booth, that's The Price of Tomorrow. I think that is, I can see it laying here. It's not that thick, I think it's a good read. It's easy to read, that really revolves around.
It barely talks about Bitcoin. It's only
exactly. Yeah. So that really revolves around, technological advancements should eventually lead to more accessibility to that technology, lowering of prices. All the prices, the cost should fall to or the prices should fall to the marginal cost of production. I think the example of having a calculator for free, in your iPhone, instead of, for my physics exam in high school, I had to buy a $200 calculator.
The TI-83 calculator.
Exactly. Yeah. That was perfect. We hacked that actually. You could hack that and put like all the material in there. Yeah. But that's now in your iPhone. So I think that's actually a great book, because as you said, you don't pitch Bitcoin. It's more about, once you read that and you realize that things don't become cheaper, the bread is $4 and not 20 cents anymore, like in the 1960s. And that book shows you that should not make sense. I think how Jeff even talks about it is, I think you could conclude that the bread should actually be free, or we should all have like a super duper, crazy little bread oven that just creates infinite bread for us in the kitchen. That's actually where we should be, but we're not there. And so I think that's one signal that should show you like how the system that we operate in, the money system, is not beneficial for us. But I wanted to ask you, when you listen to Bitcoin Tina or this podcast and you realize, I don't have enough Bitcoin, can you remember what those things were? Did that revolve around certain characteristics of Bitcoin, or what was that?
It was just the totality of it. Like, it goes from, oh, this would be like a nice investment to have and to allocate in my portfolio, to have a piece of my net worth in Bitcoin, to this is one of the most important inventions in human history, and we're able to buy a piece of it. You couldn't do that with the internet, right? You couldn't buy a piece of the internet. You could invest in companies on top of it. Or, it's just, the FOMO is real, right? Like, you don't want to miss out. It's the scarcity of it, right? There's only going to ever be 21 million Bitcoin. I need to get my piece of that pie before other people figure out what I figure out. So I think, the scarcity element, one of my big like aha moments in Bitcoin was really understanding the difficulty adjustment as part of the protocol, where just because the price of Bitcoin goes up, you might get more miners coming on, but then every 2016 blocks, it's gonna reduce the average, block time to 10 minutes again. That was really compelling to me. When you like compared it to something like gold, the price of gold goes up. Well, more miners come onto the market, gold miners, and then the price comes back down. With this is it doesn't matter if more miners are coming onto the market. That's not really what's going to bring the price down.
Yeah.
So I found that like super compelling and interesting. So I think that's one of like the secret sauces of Bitcoin that I don't think gets talked enough about to like new people that come in. We talk about the finite supply. There's only ever going to be 21 million, but the difficulty adjustment is, and we talk about double spend, solving the double spend problem. The difficulty adjustment is crucial and necessary for the way the supply, comes out onto the market over, the next years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, right? I think all the touch points around Bitcoin kind of revolve around why should it exist? What is it? How does it work? How does it keep its promise, right? And I think the promise is this: how does it keep the absolute digital scarcity promise actually alive, right? And I think after that comes this difficulty adjustment part, which is actually, I think, one of the questions that I get asked a lot, like, why can't you make more? Or why, even today, Donald Trump tweeted something about, so we are recording this on the day of the anniversary of the release of the white paper. So Donald
Happy
Trump,
White Paper Day.
Yeah. I sent to my friend like nerd,
and happy Halloween.
Yes.
If you celebrate.
We are both the Bitcoin nerds, yeah. But he tweeted something about that, and then so fascinating, the anonymous account, from like the hacker group Anonymous.
Yeah.
They replied like because Donald Trump said, we want Bitcoin to be created or made in the USA, something like that. And then they're like, yeah, you're a retard, something like that. Like, anyone can mine Bitcoin if you have a strong enough miner, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is that anyone can put up computers to mine Bitcoin, right? Just as Donald Trump says, we want the Bitcoin to be mined or created in the USA. Okay, fine. You create a, federal mining center and you start mining Bitcoin, but that does not mean that you can get more Bitcoin than anyone else because you put more computing power, right? So eventually, if other countries also join, the computing power goes up. But through that difficulty adjustment, the block stay around like 10 minutes. But yeah, I think the difficulty adjustment next to the absolute digital scarcity is probably one of the biggest innovations / discoveries that are part of Bitcoin, right? As you said, like, the promise is there are never more than 21 million. You can verify that every 10 minutes. If more people try to mine Bitcoin, it's still not going to be more than 21 million or faster than the 10 minutes. And that basically closes the entire loop, I think, of the promise of Bitcoin.
Well, first you have to realize, look, a lot of people come to Bitcoin for like various reasons, but primarily it's either like greed and curiosity or necessity, right? But the only way to really understand like Bitcoin is why was it created in the first place, right? And then what are the problems in the current system today, and what is money? So fundamentally, those are the first questions before you really like dive into what makes Bitcoin work. You have to realize that Bitcoin is a solution to many problems. Because if you don't think there's a problem, then what's the point, right? So first you need to think, all right, Bitcoin's a solution to multiple problems, right? Trusting third parties, governments, debasing currencies, all these different things. So once you get to that, then you get more into like the minutia of how it works. And then you have these aha moments of, oh, there's only 21 million. Oh, there's, the difficulty adjustment. Oh, you can't double spend. Like that. I didn't even think about that as like a concept, but yeah, it makes sense. That's why we've needed trusted third parties to tell us, oh, this digital money moved. Now we don't need that anymore. Yeah. So yeah, you have to get to what is money and understanding money, and that there's a problem first.
You know, I think that's kind of like the starting point. Yeah, I actually want to ask you about that. Like, what, from your experience talking to a lot of people probably over the last 10 years, what do you think is the main thing or the biggest thing that people need to understand about a financial system or money, and why? Like, how does that lead them to the reason of existence for Bitcoin?
Well, the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues for me is money, represents like time and value. And if that is being debased, you are having your time stolen from you. And other than Bitcoin, time is really the only other scarce thing we have, right? So at least as an individual, we all have a finite amount of time on this planet, at least consciously. We don't know how much that is. But if I am being, compensated and rewarded for my time and the value I put out with something that doesn't hold its value, that's a problem. So that's kind of how I think about it from my lens. Bitcoin does a lot of things for a lot of different people, and some people need it for other reasons, right? Escaping a country, or just they don't have a financial system that works for them. For me, I don't have a money that works for me. So I want a money that works for me. And fortunately, in addition to a money that works, we also are coming around in a time where Bitcoin is in its, adoption phase. So we're also going to see appreciation from more and more people understanding that. So we get the best of both worlds. We get to prevent the debasement of our time, or our money and our time, and also get the reward of that. And that's kind of the secret for why Bitcoin can be successful in the first place. If it didn't go up, people wouldn't be here. Like the value of it has to go up over time.
Yeah, I agree. I love your explanation there. I recently published a paper called that Bitcoin is the measurement for human productivity, the standard measurement for human productivity. And I start with exactly what you just said. And it took me a long time to figure out or to realize that is the case, right? Like, as you said, your limited time you spend on, whatever, any job or venture, and the reward that you get for that can be infinitely created, which is just the dumbest trade that you could ever make, right? Like, how do you experience talking about this and the money and Bitcoin with your generational peers, or our generational peers? I would assume you're a millennial too. As you said, like, you don't really go out there anymore and try to orange pill people. People come to you.
Yeah, so I am a millennial. My peers and my friends these days generally like get it, and they get the need, which is completely different from like probably like 5-6 years ago. Completely different.
Same friends, you mean? Same people?
Same friends, but now they get it. And even newer people, they're like, oh, I've heard about this Bitcoin thing. Tell me about it. People realize there's a problem. They can't necessarily identify it, but tying money as a problem and then saying, oh, Bitcoin's an alternative, people are like, oh yeah, that like makes sense. But for them to like really get passionate about it, like you or like me, a lot of people just don't make that jump. Especially if, they might be suffering from seeing like their grocery prices go up. Maybe their rent is going up. Maybe their car insurance is going up because of inflation. But if their lives haven't like dramatically changed, that a lot of them just aren't going to get like fully orange pilled. Yeah. Comfortability breeds complacency.
Yeah.
Right? If you're comfortable, you're not really going to like dive deep into something. But there's definitely less people straight out objecting to Bitcoin in my, age group. than there were like just like 4 or 5 years ago. But that goes for like across all spectrums that I've talked to. I mean, I don't really know many people younger than me, like Gen Z people, but anyone like my age or older, they get it now, like to a certain extent. Okay. This is like necessary, and there's a problem here.
Quick question. If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and it's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire-resistant, water-resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think it's interesting you said like same people 5 years ago. I was thinking while you were talking, I think I have the same. Like the people that I'm still around, you know, that are still around from 5 years ago, they're actually all into Bitcoin, you know, and I was usually the person, you know, if I would go visit them with my girlfriend was would, you know, just like the meme, she would be like, you know, please wait a little before you like throw Bitcoin in there, you know, and I do that. But now they actually come when, you know, when we are hanging out or like lunch or dinner, at some point they just really want to talk about Bitcoin because they're studying and they have questions, right? Or they saw someone on TV talk about Bitcoin or whatever, and they want to know what I think. Like they want to, you know, have a conversation like we're having, like we're jamming on it and sharing our thoughts, etc. You know, you see that also across the board. I think like also different levels of education or whatever. Like people are triggered in a curious way, right? They I think that's what we call the rabbit hole. But the rabbit hole is kind of like never ending, right? So you go in it and then you discover something. You think like, what else isn't true, right? And then I thought it was true or stuff like that. And then it just like keeps going. And at one point, I think it becomes, I don't want to say entertaining, but kind of rewarding to feel that you were like studying or researching and trying to just build your conviction, not only on Bitcoin, but on like a multitude of subjects, right? Like, what do I actually think of this or that, right? And I think that's intellectually rewarding for people, and that's why they just wanna talk about it. I think that's fun. That made me reflect on that. But I think I see that in a similar way, you know. But what you mentioned is I think the financial privilege that Alex Gladstein talks about, right? If you still have it good enough, although, you know, the watermelon is $20 or however much it is, you know, if you can still buy a $20 watermelon, then you're good. You know, like you don't really have the real problem.
Yeah. It's funny in the US, you know, we celebrate Thanksgiving the last Thursday in November. That's coming up in about 4 weeks from when we're doing this recording. And that actually stands as like a good point of reference because every year I do like family and have friends for Thanksgiving, like usually the same friends and family. And you could see like the conversation around Bitcoin change year after year. It's like, you know, in 3 years ago, we were going through this crazy bubble. Everyone, you know, wants to talk about Bitcoin. Then 2022, oh, that Bitcoin thing's dead. And you're like, no, not really. And then 2023, you know, you want to talk about it. No one wants to talk about it. And then, you know, it's 2024 now, and looks like we're, you know, heading into what could be a really good bull market, and you're going to have people asking questions about it. That's an interesting time of year in America to be able to kind of think back to the prior times you know congregated with family.
Yeah.
Because you know, there were times where people were like, I don't want to hear about this, right? I don't, and like I said, I don't even like bring it up anymore. I consciously make sure not to like bring it up, but people inevitably bring it up to me. What are you doing for work these days, right? And I'm tied to the Bitcoin space. But one other thing I wanted to mention that you said before about shortcuts. You know, people want a shortcut. when people come up to me and they ask me, how much Bitcoin should I get? I have one response, and I always say this to everyone. I say none. Because if you have to ask me how much you need, you're not ready to own it. You're not ready to own this
I
thing.
love it. Yeah.
And, at first they're like, no, come on, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, maybe like get a little, dip your toe in. But really, if you have to ask the question, then you don't know what you own. And as soon as the price goes down any significant amount, you're going to panic sell. So, you're not ready.
Yeah.
But then they're more like, what do you mean I'm not ready? What do you mean I should get none? So it's interesting. It's like reverse psychology, but I mean it too. I do mean it. Well, you don't understand it. You shouldn't own this.
To counter that a bit, I think it's almost necessary that you buy it when you don't know enough, and then you panic sell, and then later it goes back up, and you're like, "Am I an idiot, or do I just don't understand it?" Like,
but they don't listen to me.
How do I get this back? No, but I mean, like, it has to happen to you, right, before you realize, like, oh, okay. No, okay, I'm gonna really like spend time to study this thing because apparently I didn't know enough. Like you have to get burned to some degree, right? Because it gives you I think that's what humbles you, actually, right? When you're at that point where you're like, okay, this is a valuable thing, I need to get it, then you buy it, then the price goes down, you panic, you sell it, but your understanding didn't really, like, you're like 60% there or something.
I think that was majority of people's journeys maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, but I think it's a little different now because of people like you and the resources that we're putting out, that people don't necessarily have to touch the stove to understand it. I mean, this is obviously an outlier example, but look at Michael Saylor. He came in 2020. As far as we know, he's never sold any of his Bitcoin. He didn't have to like touch the shitcoin stove. He didn't have to, he didn't panic sell, right? So I think, and look, he's like a freaking genius, but there's more and more people who don't necessarily have to touch the stove. But it is one way of learning for a lot of people. But some people, they touch the stove and then they're like, I'm done with this forever. I never want to get burnt.
Yeah. I would agree with that, because I am, with Michael Saylor, I think, he has his best friend, one of his best friends that orange pilled him. So he's probably, well, we should ask him on Twitter. But what I say to my friends who eventually get into Bitcoin, also because I'm urging them to, or I did that before, is like, if you ever think of selling, you call me, I say, don't fucking sell. And then I hang up, and then they're all like, okay, so I would agree that, they have a friend in me that would say, like, please don't sell, like, just give it a little more time. But yeah, I think, I also literally described my own experience, right? So I think that's what really helped me to be humbled very quickly. And then I really had to work hard to, get back the Bitcoin that I sold. And as I mentioned, I bought at 300-400, sold everything at 4,000. Now I have less than I had then. And in hindsight, that's pretty stupid, but that's part of the learning curve. Yeah. So what's the main thing that people need to like learn or unlearn before seeing that Bitcoin is key to a path that could lead them to a secure financial future, as opposed to what we just mentioned, the money is being debased on purpose, so it's stealing your time. Like, what's the like mind hack, or what's the biggest thing you think that they should learn or unlearn?
Oh God, so many things.
Or maybe for you, what was it?
I would just say, like, remove your ego from it. Remove the I'm too late to this game that people play with each other, because that's also an ego thing, because you're like comparing yourself to how other people got in early and had potentially like more appreciation. So, take your ego out of it. Don't let like limiting beliefs stop you that, oh, this can't work because this system has been around for so long, right? Like, things change. And when you're going through the change, sometimes it's hard to see it. But when you look back, it's obvious, right? But when you're going through it, and you can see this with like technologies throughout history, when electricity was created, they were like, oh, this electric, it's going to like fall on people and kill everyone. Or the automobiles are going to put all the horse and buggy people out of business, and it's going to be bad, and everyone's going to like get ran over by cars. It's going to be.
It's always the same. That's what I try to remember. It's always the same with anything, from book printing to trains and like everything.
It's like a survival skill. We have to find like the negatives to protect ourselves from harm. But sometimes in doing that, we stop ourselves from learning something new. Right. Yeah. So yeah. I would just say, like, when you have that first mental resistance, when it's like, this must be why it can't work. Like, dig a little deeper. Don't just stop because you had a thought, or you heard from one person who you respected, right? You respected Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and they called it rat poison, right? Or you respected Mark Cuban because you're into basketball and he owned a basketball team. Now he's kind of come around to Bitcoin, it seems. I don't know if he really like truly understands it, but like, just look at so many people, big, well-known people who are respected in their industries. Like, don't come up to your own conclusions.
Yeah.
Don't lean on others, because as I said before, when the price of Bitcoin's moving up or down, you're only going to be with yourself. So you have to build your own conviction and your own knowledge.
Yeah, I think I've said something like understanding Bitcoin is a constant game of figuring out or answering the question, can I still trust myself? So you're doing the work, or you think you did enough work, right? And then you sell, for example, and then you're like, oh damn, I didn't understand it. So it's these gradual steps that get you there. And I like what you said. Eventually, I do think it's an ego test, in the sense that everyone's ego is basically instructed to protect you, quote unquote, right? So if you run into something uncomfortable, like realizing that through the money that you were forced to adopt, you're basically giving away your energy and time to your government, right? So they can pay off a debt that you never got any value from, right? Like, that's not a nice realization to have, right? So that's instantly tension or conflict, right? And I think it's easy to then say like, oh, this Bitcoin thing, never mind, I'm not going to look at it. Or yeah, you're going to believe like some simplistic argument that it's boiling the oceans. Okay, that's bad, I don't want to be associated with that, and then you just leave it. Yeah, I think eventually it's an ego test. I think also what's interesting is the fact that it's an ego test is like a signal in itself, right? Like, that you realize that you're so indoctrinated from a very young age, right? Like from when you got like your allowance, maybe in coins and bills, and that at one point when you were 12 or something, when you got like your kid account at the bank, that you were so happy to put the money in the bank, like stuff like that. Like, it goes all the way back there, right? And I think that's just why it's so hard. It's maybe not even the factual information, how does Bitcoin work, but just the impact of it. I think that's just why it's so hard sometimes, and why people dismiss it easily, because studying is hard.
Yeah, and you use the word, I think, indoctrination, and a more negative word for that is really brainwashing from a young age. It might not be like as intentional or malicious, but really, that's what it is. We're told this is the way it is. This is what we're surrounded by. Then Bitcoiners, we have this epiphany. We're told once we break out of this that we're the ones in a cult, because we have come to this understanding, when in actuality, the cultish behavior are the people who aren't questioning, the system that they're in the first place. But they don't even know to question the system.
Well, they're trusting a system that they didn't voluntarily agree to participate in, right? So that's not a nice realization, right? Like, okay, I'm doing something and I have no clue how it works. I don't know why I joined. When did I join this thing? And it's not even working for me. So what am I doing?
Yeah, that's a really good point about how it's involuntary. Like, the system, you're just born into it. Yeah. Up until Bitcoin, you didn't have a choice. Now you have a choice.
Yeah, I agree. So what's the biggest misconception about Bitcoin that you would wish to debunk?
That a lot of Bitcoiners like you and Bitcoiners who travel to these conferences and go all around the world are just in this for like selfish reasons and like number go up. You know, you could really never know people's motives, but I've met so many amazing people in the Bitcoin world who are really trying to like make a difference. And the people outside of the Bitcoin space try to diminish that a lot. So I guess that's the biggest misconception about Bitcoiners, maybe, is that they're only here for the money. But, you know, there's that saying, you know, you come for the money, but you stay for the money, like the revolution about the money. I don't know. Maybe that was like a sideways way of answering your question. But that's what came to mind at first.
Yeah. I think it's always so funny when people say like, oh, you're advocating for Bitcoin because you own Bitcoin. And then my reply is always like, yeah, you know what would be weird if I didn't own Bitcoin and would be talking about it. And I like
that's a good point.
Of Bitcoin.
That's a great point.
So it's more to show that it's a non-argument, you know, like, so then you would say like anything that you talk about positively because you adopted it in your life is bad. You know, like it's kind of like what we talked about. Like, this is just like this argument that would be like, oh, yeah, well, please go away. Like, you're talking about the money again. You know, like, I don't want to listen to you. Something like that.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about that people have about Bitcoin?
I like the question. It's a difficult question.
It is difficult. See, now I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to answer. This is your show.
I think what people don't realize, and it took me also a long time to understand the word decentralization, like the impact of decentralization, which is eventually the trustlessness, right? So they still think there's something to be trusted, but the entire point is that you don't have to trust anyone, right? Like, you don't have to trust what we say. You can verify all these things about the Bitcoin network and, you know, the monetary rules, etc. Like, you can do that yourself. And I think the biggest misconception is that people don't see that attribution. They don't attribute that to the decentralization. Does that make sense? Like, they think decentralization, okay, it's just a word. It's just a word, but there's actually an impact. It means that you don't have to trust anyone. And you can connect that to, you know, this reflection on the current money that is like, okay, who am I actually trusting? Oh, these 5 people at the central bank. What is a central bank actually? It's they dismiss something that is pretty profound, actually. You know, that you don't have to trust other people to be able to exchange value with other people. You know, like, that is so new.
And we take that for granted.
That's what I mean. Yes, I was looking for that word. Yeah.
Yeah, we take that for granted because, you know, in the US, we have things like Venmo or Cash App, and they kind of just like work until they don't work for people, until you're like banned off those protocols. And I think that that's one of the big misunderstandings about Bitcoin, is that it's a protocol. People don't just think of it as some like digital token, like in the ether. I hate to say the word ether, but, you know, just in space, in digital space, right? Like, it's just some token floating around. But this is a monetary network. This is a protocol. It's a lot bigger than just a token, a digital token.
Maybe that's what I wanted to say. Like, the biggest misconception is that they oversimplify it, because they've never had to think about how it works before, right? Like, as you said, like, if I send you with PayPal, I send you some dollars, then the number changes in my screen and it changes in your screen, and, you know, that works, right? You know, but what Bitcoin actually is that the changing numbers on the screen, but then real, you know, like, it's actually doing what money is supposed to do. So I think the biggest misconception is that people oversimplify it. So when they hear decentralization, for, you know, the example that I had, it's like, oh, okay, so there's like all these computers everywhere. What is that all about? You know, something like that. It's just simplification. And I think that's also the consequence of fiat money in general, right? Like, fiat money is a zero-sum game. It's like, it's like one big fight club in a sense, right? If I win, you lose, and something like that. And eventually Bitcoin is so simplistic that it's just so hard to grasp in this obfuscated, you know, vague world of fiat money, that you never even consciously adopted, right? Like it's just this paradigm is also what Jeff Booth talks about, right? It's not, you cannot even compare it to the money that you know, because the money that you know technically is not even money according to the definitions. It's not even real money. So people are comparing it to something that is just not reasonable in a sense. They're looking from their own paradigm to this totally different paradigm, and I think that's why they oversimplify their like the characteristics of Bitcoin. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I like what you said about, like, in the fiat world, it's people think they're fighting over the same, like, pie, winner take all kind of thing. But I feel in the Bitcoin world, I just, because you have a money that grows in purchasing power over time, and a network that keeps growing over time, seems like everyone benefits and there's something for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
When in the fiat world, it seems a lot more cutthroat, and it's just different.
Bitcoin is a mutually beneficial game, right? So it's kind of like this information arbitrage in the fiat world, like the people closer to the money can benefit from new money, etc.
Exactly.
That eventually trickles down to the normies like us, and then we have the money that's already debased. But in Bitcoin, and that's also why Bitcoin is not a cult, by the way, we're telling everyone about it. These are the rules. Please join us. Check it here. Buy a node. Buy a miner. And please join us. There is not really, in that sense, any information arbitrage when you are in Bitcoin, because everything is open source. You can verify it for yourself. The whole point is that you verify it for yourself, right? The only information arbitrage we have is with the people that are fully immersed in the fiat money world still.
Yeah, and the fact that it's open source, it's out there, it's that no one controls it. You don't have the same risks that you have with other investments and other assets. I think about, let's say tomorrow Michael Saylor, like, all of a sudden decided, Bitcoin's not for him, and he, like, market dumped all the Bitcoin onto the market all of a sudden, right? Like, obviously the price would go down. You'd have a lot of, like, hysterical people, but in the end, Bitcoin's still Bitcoin. You still have the network. There's still only 21 million Bitcoin, and that's what's so beautiful about it. The risks that exist in all other, like, assets and systems don't exist here. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think we're probably crazy, but we would probably laugh about it. Like, what an idiot.
Yeah, that's what we.
Yeah.
No, we would. That's what we do.
Yeah, that's funny.
So Bitcoiners are built different.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about what Michael Saylor is doing, but before that, what are your thoughts on the finance bros or traditional finance actually adopting Bitcoin? I mean, the ETFs now hold like 1 million Bitcoin combined, so they are sucking that up. My idea there is that, especially for BlackRock, I think they are buying the Bitcoin that their ETF customers are selling. So when the ETF customer sells their ETF coupon, I think BlackRock is buying that Bitcoin from them for themselves. But yeah, what do you think about this new phase of Bitcoin where traditional finance, not everyone, of course, in traditional finance, but a lot of big ones are adopting Bitcoin? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think this is just like a logical step that was going to happen in Bitcoin's adoption. The fact that it has happened in 15 years is pretty remarkable. I'm not, like, anti it, and I'm not pro it happening. I just kind of knew these things were going to happen over time. If you want Bitcoin, to reshape the way everyone in the world thinks about money, it's going to include people in traditional finance, and they're going to come around before a lot of other people. And, there might be some ideological resistance to that, but we really don't have a choice about how it's going to turn out, right? Bitcoin's for anyone. Whoever wants to adopt it is going to adopt it. Bottom line is, like I said, like, it's all open source. If you hold your Bitcoin, you run your node, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and for me, it's also, and this might sound like a spiritual answer, I think just everything has happened exactly how it has supposed to happen. The scammers, the shitcoin games, the Michael Saylors, the companies, you doing a podcast, everything that has happened happened exactly how it is supposed to. And for me to like push up against certain things just seems like a waste of time, energy, and just, it doesn't mean we shouldn't, part of that, the irony of that as well. So we should push against things, and our push is part of the process, right? This shouldn't happen. But I just feel like this is how the new money of the world was going to be formed and adopted, exactly how we've seen it adopted. And, people try to make perfect the enemy of like great. No, I don't know if like any money will ever be perfect, but I think Bitcoin is the best money we could ever have.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah. No, I talk a lot about the spiritual part actually, but I agree. I also say something like, this is a collective manifestation of an idea, right? So and I also say the same as you just said, like the fact that Wall Street adopted a random internet idea that was launched on this day on a random internet forum and some obscure mailing list. The fact that they adopted that. Do you know how many random ideas are released on the internet every day? So that in itself is so big and shows you that it has merit and that it is something that the people that should be paying attention to it, because it's their literal job, are also paying attention to it. Whatever you think of them in that sense, Bitcoin is for everyone, but an idea is something that floats in the, you just said ether, I also want to avoid ether, but you know what I mean, in the universe, and that's a metaphysical thing, and we are manifesting it in this in our 3D world, basically, and I think that is what adoption is just the manifestation of this idea. And this idea was written down on this white paper, shared in this email list, talked about on forums and social media and podcasts like this. It's like that is how an idea eventually manifests into a thing that has a reason of existence, and argument to live, basically, right? Or to exist and to have value and to be used by people. So yeah, I fully agree. I also think it goes how it goes. We can still, as you said, if Michael Saylor sells, maybe that's part of it. Price goes down, people lose their conviction. But again, as Jeff Booth says, is Bitcoin still decentralized and secure? If yes, then nothing changed. So Michael Saylor is an idiot in that case, and you should keep stacking Bitcoin. Like it's all part of this manifestation of the idea of Bitcoin. So I fully agree with you there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So
it's the biggest like social experiment in human history.
Yeah. Yes.
Like it's really just one of the biggest.
And again, I think that is also something that makes it hard to believe that this could be so big, right? Because once you realize, okay, am I living through the monetization of a new money that's secured with math and physics and works on these computers, and I don't have to trust anyone, and it's global and instant and non-sovereign, yeah, you are actually living to something that's that huge, right? Wild. Like, yes, you deserve that, like, because you're alive right now, like, that's why I think you mentioned before this self-doubt, but I think this is part of it, because there will be a point in your studying about Bitcoin where you realize, wow, is it this big? Yeah, it's this big. And then this little voice in your head is going to be like, oh yeah, sure, you figured it out, like, you're going to doubt yourself, but also because it's so hard to realize that you are living in this transition time. Like this is the time that you usually read about in the history books of something else that was like really huge, right? Like, that's just what I think. Like, it's just another factor that challenges you in that sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So Michael Saylor is buying all these Bitcoin for his company treasury. I don't know how many he has right now, but at time of recording yesterday or day before, he announced that the next 3 years he's gonna have like 42 billion to buy Bitcoin. I did a quick calculation. If he buys all the newly mined Bitcoin on the day or the month, doesn't really matter, then the floor is $74,000 for the next 3 years, which is just one guy buying. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this quest that he's on, and that's also slowly getting copied by other companies and states, even, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what to think about it other than like what everyone else has kind of said at this point. When Michael Saylor first came onto the scene in 2020, thought he was an interesting guy. But you never really know someone's like true motives or intentions, or if his conviction's going to stand, right? We've seen like people come in and out of the space who are like, worshipped by Bitcoiners, right? And then, they're not anymore. Or they soured on Bitcoin for whatever reason. And, all the evidence I have from seeing him in public and sometimes in person and speaking with him, this is his mission to acquire as much Bitcoin as he can, and he has found I don't know what you call it, like the infinite money glitch. Being a public company, being the size of his company, being able to access markets that you and me can't, and really taking advantage of that for his shareholders. I don't own any MicroStrategy currently. Obviously, it's performed really well. I know everyone's excited about it. There are still risks, obviously, in owning MicroStrategy. I don't know. It's pretty cool. It's another experiment. It's like a mini social experiment within this bigger. I don't know if we should call it mini. It's a social experiment within this like larger social experiment. We have all these experiments going on. Some are going to go bust, right? We've seen over the years exchanges. We've seen companies, collapse. But the main experiment keeps going. So this is just one of the experiments within the experiment, and we'll see how it goes. And I love that there's so many haters. I wish people didn't hate it, but again, that's kind of our opportunity here when you have people who are skeptical and don't come to Bitcoin. But it's funny to see people like continuously doubt what Saylor has done and what MicroStrategy's done, and it just won't stop. It's funny, it's entertaining, and I say, keep pumping our bag, Saylor. I'm okay with it, whatever.
Yeah, it's just so I always think about, like the most entertaining outcome is the most likely. That's like really what this experiment is about. Not only Bitcoin, but this little fractal that is MicroStrategy is the same thing, because all these other CEOs in the S&P 500 that he eventually will get into, I think, are probably pretty baffled, right? Like they're either, how we talked about this, like, oh, he's an idiot. What is he doing? Or they're shocked and they're thinking like, how can I do this? Oh, damn, I don't have a majority voting in my board. Like, how am I going to do this? What is this Bitcoin thing actually? Damn, I have to study. It's just so, it's so entertaining. It's so entertaining to follow. And I think it's really this internet culture of, what we just said also about this manifestation, right? Like you can drop an idea on the internet, and if you find enough people that like the idea, it could manifest in the real world. And I think what Saylor is doing, this just unrelentless path, following the path that he cut out for himself, I think is just amazing. Like just because he's doing it, he is manifesting it, right? Because it is very clear what this is, what he's doing. There's a lot of people like on X and also on podcasts like talking about this strategy, as you mentioned, the infinite money glitch. Like the playbook is there. He even shared his own playbook, and still no one else in the S&P 500 is following him, right? So it's literally out there, just as Bitcoin is out there. The basement of fiat money is out there. It's all out there.
And it goes to what we were saying before. In the Bitcoin world, sharing your playbook will only help you if other people do it as well.
Exactly.
Unlike the fiat world, when you're competing.
Yeah. But this is why it all sounds so good to be true, too good
Yeah.
to be true, right? That's how people dismiss it, I think.
Maybe that's one of the misconceptions, right? Like the biggest, because it's too good to be true, right? You'll hear Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme, all these things. Like maybe it just is, right? It's not too good. It just is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and if this eventually is a CIA ploy or some NSA, whatever, right? I think I have to really contemplate my own.
But again, even if they did by ploy, like if you mean like created it, it's like, okay, it's open source. We decided to adopt it. It doesn't really even matter.
That's true. I mean, more like if there's a backdoor CIA something, which I don't, I don't think so. No, but I'm just saying, like, if this and well, there's probably a non-zero chance, but it's very, 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 very small, right? But if we would get rug pulled, I would seriously have to contemplate on my own rationality and intelligence and stuff. But it would be fine. Then I would be like, I talked with a friend of mine about this. I would be like, well done, like fine, okay, you win, whatever,
But you know what? Hypothetically, even though like that non-zero chance is like infinitesimally small.
Yeah.
The journey that I've gone on, and I'm sure you've gone on in a different way, and the people I've been able to connect with around the world, it's priceless.
Yeah, I agree.
So the value I've gotten from this social experiment that we call Bitcoin, even if it disappeared tomorrow, like I still gain so much in terms of the network I've made and the person that I've become.
Yeah. So what is the most surprising thing you learned about yourself through your Bitcoin journey?
The most surprising thing I learned about myself, I've just evolved a lot as a person and my way of thinking over the years, and a lot of that is due to Bitcoin. So I guess the things I thought I knew before Bitcoin, I really didn't know. And it's really a humbling process. So I'd say maybe it helps make you into a better person. It's also helped me become a better person, take more chances, meet more people. You find Bitcoin, everyone's telling you like why it's a scam, it can't work, and then you come to this point of conviction, you see it is working. It enables you to think you could do anything, or you can try anything. And even if there's people, doubting you or telling you this is a bad idea, you want to walk through that door yourself. If it might be a bad idea, something else might be a bad idea. They might be right, but it teaches you that not the crowd isn't always right. And maybe just walk through that door on your own. So that's one of the biggest lessons for me that it's helped with.
Nice. Well, and at one point you decided to contribute to the space when, you started working for Bitcoin companies. Now you're consulting with some of them. Do you have any tips for people who'd like to, find a job or even start a company in this industry? Like, how could you help them?
Yeah. So like I said, my background was in accounting. And up until a little over a year ago, I was still doing that full time. I never had a desire to work in the Bitcoin space. I actually resisted working in the Bitcoin world for a long time because Bitcoin was something I was really passionate about. I didn't want it to become a job, one. Also, all but a very small percentage of my net worth is in Bitcoin. So I'm like, well, now if I'm going to work in the Bitcoin space, now my cash flows coming in are tied to Bitcoin. So I really didn't even want to touch the Bitcoin space for a while. I just wanted to talk to people about Bitcoin. But probably like I said, 2019, 2020, none of my friends wanted to talk about Bitcoin. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to find random people on the internet to talk about Bitcoin too. And people started engaging with me and following me on Twitter. And, I started hearing from CEOs in the Bitcoin space. And originally it started with Swan. Corey, the CEO of Swan, reached out to me early maybe late 2020, just to kind of like hear about my Bitcoin journey. And then I started doing some contract work where I was running rooms on Clubhouse for them back in the day, and just talking to people about Bitcoin while I still had my full-time job. Then I don't know if we mentioned this earlier on the podcast or right before we started the podcast, but then I started my own podcast with Joe Carlosari back in, I think I said 2022, but it might have been 2021. I can't even remember now. But that was just, me and Joe meeting through Clubhouse, and it was like, let's do it. So that just started. And then the merch and apparel company I have, FOMO21, that happened because my now business partner, Ryan, reached out to me. He's like, oh, I've been following you on Twitter and Clubhouse for a couple of years, and you're part of my like orange pilling like journey. I've been in the merchandise and apparel space for over 20 years. I think you'd be a good partner. So then that happened, right? I help promote conferences. I just one day on Twitter, I saw, I think Bitcoin Magazine saying, oh, anyone who has like 10,000 followers who could help us sell tickets, like reach out to us. I think that's what it said. It's hard to remember, but I'm like, all right, I'll do this. And then I ended up selling a ton of tickets for them every year. Promo code FOMO will get you a discount, by the way, at those conferences. No, so I just started doing all these things while I still had my full-time job. And then a year ago, I ended up finally leaving my accounting career, and I was working full-time at Swan as head of brand engagement, leading their social media team, the affiliate program. As I'm sure some of your listeners know, Swan had big layoffs last summer, like I don't know if it was like half the company, but it was a big amount of people. And I was part of that. So now I'm doing consulting for other Bitcoin companies right now. One's in the Bitcoin mining space, which Abundant Minds, the CEO, we're trying to get him on your show at some point in the future. So hopefully that happens. Awesome company. But yeah, so a long-winded way of answering your question is I never had an intention to work in the Bitcoin space. I just did what I was passionate about, and it happened. So do what you're passionate about. I wouldn't like force it. Find something you're passionate about and overlaps in the Bitcoin world. The Bitcoin world is very volatile. It's these businesses come and go. It's very risky. And if you're already 100% in Bitcoin in terms of like your net worth, now you're like over 100% because your income is tied to it. So my first thing would be like, don't work in Bitcoin first. First, like think about what you're passionate about. And if that overlaps in the Bitcoin world, great. There was one other point I just wanted to make, and now it's like, it's fleeting. It's losing me. And also because the Bitcoin world is so volatile, I would say before working for a Bitcoin company necessarily, build your own personal brand, right? Like you have your podcast, so people know you. So if you work for a Bitcoin company in the future, people would still know you as Bram. He has his own podcast, Bitcoin for Millennials. If something didn't work out with that company, you're still Bram. So I would just say build your own personal brand first, if you can, if that's a pathway for you, before making the leap to work for a Bitcoin company.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks for sharing. I would agree. Yeah, I also I do eventually would love to work in the Bitcoin space, but I'm taking this path first. Just setting up the podcast, making sure that I'm learning how I can do this to the best of my abilities. See if I can establish following or listener base, and I think main thing actually is to just sharpen my own thoughts about Bitcoin. And I think if you create value first, then value will eventually come to you in whatever form or shape, right? So whether that's a job or a business idea or whatever, I also feel that comes later.
Yeah, and look at the network you're creating doing this podcast, right? You told me you're almost at 100 episodes published, right? I mean, look at all the people you are networked with now. Like if you ended up getting a job and that didn't work out, you already have this network built that you built through your personal brand.
Yeah.
So build your own personal brand, do what you're passionate about. That's what I wouldn't leave if you're in the fiat world, making a lot of money, and then there's a Bitcoin job available, but you're not passionate about the type of work you're going to be doing at that Bitcoin job, and you're going to be making less money. Like, why would you do it just because the Bitcoin job's available, right? Like, you got to make sure you're either making more money in this Bitcoin job or you're passionate about it or both. Otherwise, like, you could be stacking more sets in your fiat job.
Yeah.
So, and there's still ways to be involved, going to conferences, meetups, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right. Last two questions.
Okay.
What makes you most bullish when you think about the future of Bitcoin?
Well, now that I've been like in and out of the space since 2013, I've kind of I hate to like say like there's cycles because we have such a small sample size, and the math nerd in me is like, this is too small of a sample size. You see these things repeating. Anytime you doubt Bitcoin, it rises from the dead. There's always new surprises that are to the upside, and the surprises to the downside only end up making the network stronger and pass the Bitcoin from weak hands to stronger hands. So yeah, like look at the Sailor thing that he announced yesterday, right? Like that wasn't on like most people's radar. Then, I'm going to buy another $42 billion worth of Bitcoin. We have the election in the US coming up. A lot of people think if Trump wins, that'll be more bullish for Bitcoin. If he doesn't win, it's a very close race. It's a coin flip here. Maybe the price of Bitcoin will go down, but that'll be an opportunity for Bitcoiners who understand Bitcoin to come in and accumulate more. And if you think someone like Kamala is going to spend more recklessly, then that should be bullish, right, for the price of Bitcoin over time. So it's like a win-win, right? However you slice it. So there's just, it's at a point of escape velocity. It's unstoppable now. It's unstoppable. So now to me, it's just like, it's part of life now. And, the price goes up and I see it, it makes us smile. It's like, nice. But I have an expectation that it's going to happen. And I know that's like risky in a lot of other parts of life, but optimistic people win. And I'm just optimistic about Bitcoin and its future.
Yeah. Love that. Likewise. I'm very optimistic. I wish it would go faster, but I think the pace, as you alluded to before, the pace is just fine.
It's exactly how it's supposed to be.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah. And honestly, in my like core, I know it's more rewarding when you go through tough times and you quote unquote suffer. I mean, the Bitcoin price just going down isn't necessarily suffering, but you know what I'm saying? Like going through like the tough times is what's going to make it more rewarding in the end.
Yeah, I agree. All right, last question. And I ask everyone the same question.
Oh, okay.
What is a core belief that you will never let go?
Go with your gut and your instincts. My biggest regrets in life is when I relied on other people or listened to other people when my gut was telling me something else, when I had like an intuition, like, no, you should be doing something else. Now, those lessons have developed this core belief. So maybe I needed those things to happen.
Yeah.
But now I don't let them like, if I have a conviction about something, I rather like walk through that door, make the mistake and learn on my own than I never tried it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, when I don't want to look back at the end of my life and be like, man, I wish I would have done this, but I listened to this random person or even not even a random person, even someone you like and a family member, someone you adore. Ultimately, like you need to live with yourself. So I guess my core belief is to follow your gut and your intuition. It will usually lead you in the right path. And when it doesn't, you could just course correct.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing and thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And
this is awesome.
Yeah, man. Let's do it again sometime in the future.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.